4,000 years ago, in the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, people noticed a strange natural phenomenon. A thick, foul-smelling black sludge was seeping directly out of the earth. It didn't act like water, and it was entirely repellent to it. The Sumerians quickly put it to work, coating their wooden boats with the sticky substance. It created a perfect waterproof seal, making long river journeys possible and rapidly accelerating early trade. Soon, early engineers realized if it could keep water out of boats, it could fortify buildings. They began using this natural bitumen as mortar, binding bricks together to construct massive, durable walls that still stand in the ruins of Babylon today. As the substance made its way to Egypt, unique preserving properties took on a new purpose. It was mixed into the mummification process, helping shield the bodies of pharaohs from decay. These ancient empires waterproofed their hulls and entombed their kings with a material they barely understood. They manipulated the most concentrated form of energy on the planet, entirely unaware of its potential. If you ask people today where that energy came from, a lot of them will picture dead dinosaurs, but the timeline doesn't match up. The true source of this black liquid predates the dinosaurs by hundreds of millions of years. 300 to 400 million years ago, the Earth was covered in vast, shallow oceans. Trillions of microscopic algae and plankton lived, died, and drifted down into the total darkness of the sea floor, forming a thick, organic blanket. As eons passed, millions of tons of sand and sediment piled on top of them. The crushing weight and rising heat cooked these remains into a waxy substance called kerogen. When the temperature hit the exact right window, that kerogen liquefied into crude oil. Because it's lighter than the salt water buried alongside it, the oil naturally creeps up through the microscopic cracks in the rock. It keeps rising until it hits a dense, solid layer of stone it can't penetrate, forcing it to pool into massive subterranean reservoirs. For millennia, humanity lived out its daily struggles directly on top of these trapped oceans of compressed geologic time. They were using the tiny fractions that seep to the surface, completely oblivious to the scale of the energy resting just beneath their feet. By the middle of the 19th century, the growing cities of the Industrial Revolution had a serious problem. They needed light, but the whale oil they burned in their lamps was becoming increasingly scarce and expensive. Then, in 1846, a Canadian geologist named Abraham Gessner figured out how to distill that raw, black earth sludge into a clean, burning liquid called kerosene. Almost overnight, the entire industrialized world wanted it. The challenge was finding enough of it to meet demand. A retired railway worker named Edwin Drake believed he didn't have to wait for the oil to seep up on its own. In 1859, using a makeshift wooden derrick in Pennsylvania, he pierced the earth and pumped it out himself. Quiet farm towns were instantly overrun. Thousands of prospectors descended on Pennsylvania, throwing up a dense forest of wooden drilling towers. Ordinary farmers became millionaires in a matter of weeks. Drake's 69-foot well proved that the Earth's interior could be systematically emptied. This single success gave rise to a global extraction industry that would soon dominate the world economy. While everyone else was blindly gambling on digging the next well, John D. Rockefeller was watching the chaos. He realized that the real money wasn't in finding the oil, it was in controlling how it was cleaned and moved. He secured secret, ultra-low shipping rates with the massive railway companies. His competitors, forced to pay full price, couldn't match his margins. As they faced bankruptcy, Rockefeller bought them up one by one, folding them into his new empire, Standard Oil. Within a single decade, Standard Oil controlled 90% of all refined oil in the United States. His sprawling industrial complexes dictated the entire market, making Rockefeller the wealthiest individual in recorded history. But just as the invention of the electric light bulb threatened to wipe out his kerosene market, a new machine appeared. German engineer Carl Benz successfully built an engine powered by controlled explosions of gasoline. Then came Henry Ford. By putting his Model T on an assembly line, he made the automobile affordable for the masses. Suddenly, millions of cars were rolling onto the roads, followed quickly by trucks, buses, and tractors. Every advance in modern transport required a specific grade of refined crude. Civilization's movement was effectively tethered to a continuous flow of oil. By the turn of the 20th century, the mechanical thirst of Europe and the United States was far outpacing what they could pump from their own backyards. They had to look outward. In 1908, British prospectors struck a massive reserve in Iran, proving the Middle East held potential. Then, in 1938, engineers in Saudi Arabia drilled into the Dammam No. 7 well and found an ocean of oil waiting beneath the desert sand. For decades, Western corporations set up shop in these countries, struck highly favorable deals, and shipped the wealth back home. The producing nations were treated less like equal partners and more like resource colonies. But slowly, the host countries began to recognize the leverage they held. They saw that the booming modern economies of the West would completely collapse if the flow of their oil stopped. In 1960, 5 producing nations united to form OPEC, a collective designed to dictate production and pricing. The geopolitical center of gravity officially shifted from the empires burning the fuel to the nations sitting on top of it. This leverage was finally weaponized during the 1973 Middle East conflict. In response to Western involvement, Arab oil producers simply turned off the tap. They drastically slashed their daily output and halted shipments to targeted nations. The effect was instant and paralyzing. Prices quadrupled, supply vanished. Citizens sat in massive, gridlocked lines at gas stations, rationing fuel and fighting over whatever drops were left in the pumps. The 1973 crisis demonstrated that an entire global infrastructure, built over a century, could be paralyzed in weeks by turning a few valves. Our total dependence on a geographically concentrated resource has turned it into the world's primary geopolitical weapon.